Knights at the Round Table, a roundtable discussion on speculative fiction books and film.
Hello everyone, welcome to Knights at the Round Table. I am Marjolaine, I will be hosting today. I'm here with Nathan and with Gloria, and we're going to be talking about Dogma, the comedy fantasy, I guess?
Yeah, I think it's 1999.
1999, yeah. Okay, so...
20 years.
Yeah.
20 years.
20 years this year.
And wow, the behind the camera people like that.
Wow. It's funny too because I did watch the movie last week to prepare for this, but I had to first watch the movie. I think it must have been soon after it was released, like definitely over a decade ago.
I watched it in theaters.
Yeah. Oh, originally when it first came out.
Kevin Smith was kind of an important filmmaker in my personal artistic development. A lot of the things that I loved back then have not aged so well.
Yeah.
Especially some of his other movies. But yeah, I saw most of his movies in the theater, and Dogma I was really excited about. So.
Okay.
Do you feel like Dogma is one of the movies that did not age well or age well for you?
I feel like there are things in the movie that didn't age well, but I think that there are some themes that are still pretty current. So, yeah.
Do you think? I mean, usually they always go last on these things, so...
No, that's a good point. I mean, I think that... So in my mind, Kevin Smith is playing with a theme that that a lot of artists like to artists have been like talking about religion and the role of religion in society for a really long time, right? Like even with the Enlightenment, they would always do these satirical pieces. So it's interesting to see how Kevin Smith did that aspect of it. But it is very much still very much like a late 90s white cis heterosexual male view. I mean, I think that he has a lot of views in there that are pretty progressive for that time. Like there was a lot of feminist rants in there and anti-racist sort of commentary, which I appreciated. But you know, some like it's a bit of a different society that we live in now, I think, and like since it's been released in 20 years ago.
Yeah.
We're not old.
Nah.
Just 20 years older than when we first watched it in theaters.
But I was an adult back then.
I wasn't. Yeah. I don't think I watched it in movie theater when it first came out. I think I borrowed the VHS or something, or I saw it on TV, or I honestly don't remember. Rewatching it in preparation for this, I gotta say, I do see the themes that can be interesting, but I can't get over the presentation. Yeah. I don't think it aged well at all, and I don't think I might have been close enough to the target audience when I was a teenager, when I first saw it, but now I can't. No, I don't.
There's some cringe-worthy moments.
Yeah, a lot of them. God.
A few, yeah.
So, where do we go from here? Who wants to start talking?
So one thing I noted about that movie, because when it first came out, I think I was definitely going to church a lot more back then, and it kind of upset some people. But when I watched it again, I was thinking about it, and you know, in all honesty, I mean, it is a commentary about the relevance of religion in modern society, but it's not actually that blasphemous, if you think about it.
It's really not.
Like, they accept that there is a God.
They do.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the things that people were upset with back then, were... The thing is, a lot of the things that they say is actually what's in the Bible. It's actually pretty faithful to, like, the Catholic faith in particular. I watched this in 99. I went to a nun school for the early years of my my high school career.
Now, that's an interesting filter to watch Dogma.
It absolutely is. And Dogma was absolutely really, really delightful to me when I first watched it, because I was coming out of this, like, whole, like... I had a phase in my youth where I was going to join the church, you know, because I was going to church all the time. I was going to like those, like, we had prayer circles at school, and I was going to those. I went to, like, a Catholic retreat and stuff like that. Like, I was really immersed deep into faith. And then when I started discovering that I was queer, you know, that part of me, that was a huge part of me, really did not fit with the other part of me, because I couldn't have come out of that school. Like, never. That would have not have happened. And so I had, like, a huge crisis of faith in my teen years that this was, like, sort of the perfect thing to it, because it did it all with humor. And you can see a lot of the characters in it have crises of faith that belong to them too, but none of them are going the route of, like, well, there's no God. You know, they have all these crises of faith while knowing very well there is a God. So to me, that was a huge, it was kind of a balm on my spirit. You know, I don't believe in God anymore, but it made the transition easier watching that movie at that time.
And that's the thing, it wasn't necessarily a criticism I saw on the belief in God itself, but more the sort of constructed, organized religious, like, practices and rituals that came out of it. And they weren't even saying that all of it is bad, but some of them, they were just saying, like, well, maybe we should think about why people do this, you know?
Exactly. And there's the huge distinction that they make between, like, well, you know, people came up with it. All of these rules that, like, would allow these angels to do this thing. But because they have to hold that notion that, like, oh, well, God said it was that way. So if God said it was that way, even though just men said it, well, then you sort of, like, have to hold that belief. And there's this whole kind of circular thinking within the church, not necessarily religion, but, like, within the institution of the church, where, like, you justify what you're doing by what you're doing. Because, like, oh, well, I said it, this was true, so now I have to hang on to this tooth and nail, no matter what, because I said it was true. And if you pick apart one little thing, then the whole thing comes tumbling down because of the way that it's structured. And this is why you have things like creationism right now.
They're trying to explain retroactively.
Exactly. Like, no, science can't be right because, you know, the Bible says this, and the Bible has to be textually correct.
And I think there's an interesting scene in the strip club, actually, where I think the muse's name is Serendipity. She points out how the Bible was, like, I mean, like if you accept the premise that there is a God and God has messages, it's still being interpreted by humans, right? And so she talks about how there's, like, a whole gendered approach to the writing of the Bible, and they left out this and left out that, and, you know, Chris Rock complains that he was left out of the Apostles because, you know, he was black, and all these, like, sort of ideas that, you know, even if there was a word of God, which personally I think it speaks to me. I think there is a God, but we do have to understand it is, like, men that are, like, not men, but humans that are preaching in the churches and that are, like, translating these Bibles and things like that. And so these all get filtered in a way that, like, you still always have to think about and reflect on very critically.
Yeah. My dad once said to me, you know, my dad was a deeply faithful man, and he said to me once, he said, between, you know, there's me and there's God, and this is true love. And then between me and God, there's the church. And often it's more of an obstacle than it is a vehicle.
Interesting.
And to me, that, you know, that meant a lot to me. And that movie, I think that's the whole premise of that movie. It's like, there's God, and then there's people, and the church makes it difficult at times for people to connect to their God.
It's really interesting because I was looking at other movies and books that came out around that time. Like, what did we say, 1999? And there's a couple of other, like, the Da Vinci Code, and there's Joan Osborne's song "What If God Was One of Us," and there was a bunch of things that came out that really seriously talked, like, about the role of organized religion in society. And I think that it's a Generation X thing, because, like, it was Generation X people that were putting out a lot of this stuff, right? Where they were, like, I think the first generation to really be brought up outside of the church, without the church totally dominating them. Not everyone was like that, but there was I think the larger population, or larger population than historically before, that wasn't necessarily being raised in the church and was really starting to question the role of the church in their lives, right? And so these movies, in my mind, sort of reflect that. But then when we were talking about how that movie has aged since, I think that the pendulum is swinging in a very interesting direction 20 years later, because I'm seeing a lot of renewed interest in not necessarily organized religion, but in spirituality. Like all this talk about meditation, mindfulness. I've got a lot of friends who are really into astrology and crystals, which, like argue is a different belief system, and people that are the revival of witches and things like that. There's a lot of renewed interest in connecting with a spirituality that isn't necessarily tangible, and it isn't necessarily through the Catholic Church, but it's I think that's the big change I've seen in the 20 years since Dogma came out.
Yeah, I can see that.
You start thinking about how there was a lot of God related entertainment at that time, and I don't know why, but immediately my mind went to maybe it was related somehow to the Y2K fear, like the...
Oh yeah, that would have been right on the cusp of the new millennium.
That's true, yeah.
Oh, I forgot we were all worried about that back then. If only we knew what we should have been worried about.
Seriously, oh my god.
Yeah.
Little did we know.
I mean, I think that's reflected in it's hard to think back what our mindset was back at that time, but I think there was a lot of anxieties about the new millennium. Maybe not just about this bug that we were all afraid was going to hit all of our computer systems, but there was a lot of anxiety about what the future would hold in 1999, if I remember.
Yeah, 2000, the new millennium, it felt like an enormous number.
Yeah. And now we're going into 2020.
Jesus.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing that I thought was interesting about this movie, like I said, I mentioned before that I think it was relatively progressive in the sense that they acknowledge, some gender issues and racism issues. But even though like the main character is like the protagonist, the story seems to be centered around like this woman Bethany, it still felt to me like a very like male perspective, because I don't know, like I want to get your thoughts on this, because Bethany did not seem like a very interesting protagonist to me.
Bethany was not the protagonist. Jay and Silent Bob were the
that's what it is.
If you take it down, boil it down to the definition of like the person who moves the story forward, Bethany was very much following what Jay and Silent Bob were getting up to.
And she didn't have a very, other than the fact that she was
sort of the main POV character.
Yeah.
I guess that doesn't make her the protagonist, but it's an interesting case then.
Yeah.
It's not often that the protagonist and the main POV character are separated.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because she doesn't seem to have a very full personality in my mind. Like, it wasn't all that interesting, and like I remember even thinking at the time, okay, so the main woman in this story just really wants to have a baby, and she's really mad at God because she can't have a baby. I was like, that's such a... While a very real thing that lots of women face, it seems like that seems like also like a stereotype too, about that's what all women want or whatever.
She gets damseled so many times. She gets put in danger and has to be rescued so many times.
Yeah.
And even though she, like, the only interesting thing about her, I think, is the fact that she is a Catholic that works at an abortion clinic. But other than that, like, she doesn't have any, like, weird quirks, like, the way all of the other characters have some really interesting, like, the way I said, maybe you guys saw her as more interesting than I did, but,
well, someone has to be the straight man.
I guess so,
a comedy movie.
Yeah, I guess that was her.
Yeah, definitely.
No. What'd you guys think of the poop demons?
I mean, whenever I think of the poop demon, I think of the line in Clerks where Randall says, like, my grandmother used to say that you can never go wrong with a dick and fart joke.
Yeah. It's very Kevin Smith, too,
it's
right?
Very Kevin
Have some
Smith.
Intellectual discussions and also poop demon.
Yeah.
We just talked about the poop demon. Do you want to talk about the other demons, maybe? Any thoughts?
So, like, that's Azrael. Oh, and the hockey triplets.
Yeah.
The hockey triplets, yeah, oh my god.
It's funny because Azrael pops up in a couple of other pop culture, media as well. Like, I think he shows up in Lucifer, the TV show that has come out recently, and they portray him pretty differently there.
Ezrael as a Bible character is technically the angel of death, and that's what I found it funny.
Yeah.
I mean, they gave the name of the angel of death to a demon, and then they took the angel of death and they gave him the name of a Norse mythology god.
Yeah, the Loki, right?
Yeah, that was funny.
My goodness, that was like a very young Matt Damon too.
Yeah,
that brought me back.
Yeah,
and also like a pre-Snape Alan Rickman.
Oh, Alan Rickman, he was so genius.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, there's nothing he was bad at.
That scene I remember from 20 years ago when he starts speaking as the voice of God, and then Bethany goes and like douses him with a fire extinguisher. That is like actually
I completely forgot that was about to happen when
that
I
was
rewatched
the
movie.
most memorable moment of the movie for me for whatever reason. So that's like such classic Kevin Smith humor.
It really is, because he's all like, I am the Metatron. Like, ah! You people, you're impressed by nothing.
And he's just pissed off because his like nice like fashionable suit is ruined.
Yeah.
Well, should we maybe wrap up with some concluding comments then?
Oh, wait, we're early.
Oh,
We're
sorry. I
very-
think you said we had 2 minutes. Never mind. Okay.
No, we have 2
We
minutes.
have 2 minutes
but
before
then
we
have
we
another
can only
15.
film 15 minutes.
Right. Okay.
So
Okay.
now we have another 15 minutes. We just started.
Oh, I see what you're
We've
saying.
got about another 13 minutes to film.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Well,
Excellent.
if you really want to cut early.
Yeah, if you're stuck, you don't.
No, no.
No, I think we have more things to say. There was something, and then it escaped my mind. Why don't you talk about some of the cringy...
Yeah, I'm actually curious to know what you thought was cringeworthy about the presentation.
Well, first of all, there's watching a movie with Ben Affleck knowing what I know now about him. Which, like, it's hard to re-engage with an actor when you know that he is one of the people that was accused in the Me Too movement, which I need to explain to the people in the back because apparently they don't know. Yeah. It wasn't like one of the severe one, but he did do stuff. It did come up, and it's like, eesh.
Yeah.
And I think that's a key thing too, right? Like this movie was in 1999 before the Me Too movement, and a lot of these accusations and sort of even I would say like public understanding of informed consent was, because there was, if we're going into this heavy stuff, there was a reference when Loki and what's the other guy?
Bartholomew?
Bartleby.
Bartleby, when they go into that, like, the corporate boardroom and they're, like, explaining all the sins, and one of them was actually quite horrific, right? Like, he was saying, like, he accused one of them of, like, basically paying the male guy to have sex with his wife while she was passed out
unconscious,
drunk,
yeah.
and then as an
So he
excuse to
could break
divorce
up
her.
with her, yeah.
And I was like, you know what? We did not seem to recognize back then that is rape, or maybe we did.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. You know, like.
But the angel recognized it.
Yeah, that it was
the
bad.
antagonist
Yeah.
of the movie recognized that it was a bad thing.
It was a bad thing, but I'm not sure that it would have like been broadly understood as being sexual assault back then. I mean,
Yeah,
like
probably not.
We'd hope it would, but like I've seen enough references in like movies, like if you go in the right time frame, where people don't seem to really understand the notion of informed consent. And I'm not saying that's perfectly understood now, but there was a couple of moments where I was like, I don't think that would go over well now. You know.
Well, I mean, he's murdering him for it. So,
Yeah, that's true.
like,
yep.
I'm fine with that being a motive for like vengeance.
Absolutely.
Like, righteous, mighty smiting.
Yeah, that's true. Then you don't feel bad for that guy at all.
No,
when he goes through
exactly.
this whole thing.
One of the things that I found was like that made me go like was like when she's like, "Oh, what are you doing hanging outside of an abortion clinic?" And he's like, "Oh, well, we're picking up chicks because they're gonna be super vulnerable and shit." And I was like,
Oh, that did not age well.
Ah.
A little
I got that
cringy.
line as, if they're getting abortions, it's because they like to have sex. Which was, not quite. It's not as bad as the, but yeah.
everything about this
Everything
was
about
wrong.
this was wrong.
Yeah. That was
Jane Saddle Bob saving Bethany from the hockey trio.
triplets? Yeah.
Which is like, they saved her, but also they're two grown men beating up teenagers.
Yeah, well, they're
Well, they're
supernatural
teenage demons.
teenagers. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. It had a few moments like that where I was like, but it had a few really good moments.
I loved Alanis Morissette as God.
Oh my god, me too.
I loved it.
That was one of my favorite things about the movie.
It was, and the way they portrayed her as being this sort of like childlike, just, not simple, but just like there's one part where she's doing handstands in the garden, and it's just like a really sweet, interesting way to portray God.
Well, she got trapped on Earth because she likes to play
skee ball. Yeah, as like it's just a very, just it likes to enjoy humanity and constantly gets misgendered. I thought that was really interesting that the movie like shows people constantly misgendering God, and like not in an approving way.
When Bethany says to the Metatron, like calls God she in front of him, he's like, she blah blah blah, her blah blah blah, and then he goes back immediately to
I thought that was really interesting, the constant misgendering of God.
And it's funny because like transgender issues weren't really on the radar back then. Yeah. So like they were probably not even conscious of the commentary that they were doing.
Yeah.
But it was still really interesting.
Yeah.
Was there anything else that you were...
well, the rest of it is a lot of the Jane Silent Bob, the stoner humor did not fly for me, but that's like a thing. And other than that, it was the little detail, like the name switching among the angels, and the fact that Rufus made a point that he was the 13th apostle because he was black, and Jesus was also black, and I was like, well, all the other apostles were also black, though.
Probably.
So,
historically, yeah, you're right. The chances of them being white, European, very unlikely.
Yeah, so
unless someone got the Bible very wrong.
So just, I mean, him making a joke of it, like I was kicked out because I was black, fine. But once he pointed out the Jesus being black thing, his whole argument fell apart for me. Like it was, I could not. It was just weird, and I couldn't reconcile it. It was like, yeah, you just ruined your whole thing. And
what do you guys think of Buddy Jesus?
Oh my god!
What was it?
I loved it. I loved it. No, it wasn't a real thing, but the thing is, like, the Catholic Church is absolutely big business, and it wants more followers because it wants more money. And I thought, for me, that was a really, really clever thing. Like, I was like, okay, they're changing their branding, they're changing their marketing, and especially, like, how long was this after, like, the whole, sex abuse scandal?
Yeah.
Like, they needed to change their image, so they're PR. Literally changing their image and everything. I thought, like, I loved it. I thought it was really clever.
The Jesus giving the finger guns like that, it wasn't. I could have sworn I'd seen that image before, and I don't think it was the movie that stuck into my mind for that long.
No, but it's been used as a meme for quite a while.
Yeah, because because of that was pretty influential. And I think that both the Catholic Church and the Church in a broader sense have been trying different ways to maybe like fix their image and have a broader reach, right? Like, I mean, so in some ways it's good because I've like, some churches are like, I saw there was a church that was having a dinner for LGBTQ people who aren't able to go home for Christmas. I was like, okay, that's a good way of doing it. There's other ones that are, I'm not a huge fan of Christian rock, but they're trying to make their services more relevant, so they're putting in a lot more Christian rock as opposed to the traditional hymn. So the church, it's so I think that was a reflection on how the church has been trying all these different ways to get the youth back into it, but some more successful than others. Not a fan of Christian rock. It's not very good.
Have you ever seen the movie Saved?
No,
I have.
You would enjoy it thoroughly.
Yeah.
Check it out when you're speaking of Christian rock.
Yeah,
it's very good.
And actually, one thing I was thinking about when you were talking about whether Jesus is black or white, if you go to Korea and you go to like the churches there, Jesus is Korean. so maybe.
Of course he is, because he's like you.
I guess that's the whole idea, is that he's supposed to be relatable or whatever. I don't think that's historically accurate though.
Are you sure?
Maybe,
Yeah, Bethlehem in Galilee. It's over there in Korea. We all know that.
It's a little far.
Cool twist.
Yeah.
Turned out that way.
Do you want to go to general impressions and star ratings?
Sure. Do you want to start?
Sure. Dogma was a really meaningful movie for me in my life. I still think it holds up generally, despite a few cringy things. 3.5 for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like I really liked the movie. Like I said, it's not a new theme, but it's Kevin Smith's really interesting take on the theme. And what I did like, this is why I have a different impression from you. I really liked that he had a really engaging storyline where it did tie together, you know, like Jay and Silent Bob stole a golf club from the priest or cardinal, and then that became pivotal in the plot. Like, so I liked the storyline. It was very entertaining.
Yeah, and the fact that, like, you know, God is in a coma and everything, it's very well planted throughout the movie. Like, you see little hints of that.
So I liked the storyline. I thought that it was very entertaining. So I would probably give it a 3.5 as well.
Well, we're going to end this panel on this hour now. I can appreciate the things that you have said. I cannot enjoy the movie as it is. I'm going to have to give it 1 star.
Well, that's fine. We don't need to agree on everything.
Do I pick?
Yes.
Okay. So, we have here My Neighbor Totoro. Okay.
Oh, yay. More Miyazaki.
But someone knows how to pronounce it. Oh, you don't put it back in there?
So our next movie is going to be the Ghibli animated movie,
Oh,
My Neighbor
cool.
Totoro.
Nice.
And okay, so if you have any thoughts on Dogma or any suggestions for future movies, leave them in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe. And we're going to be back live in a couple of minutes on Twitch for the next movie. I
think we're doing Spirited Away
Spirited
next.
Away.
Oh, nice.
Another Miyazaki.
Yay!
Bye.
Bye.